Hey, hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Wow, guys, come on. This is not a dead X, huh? Let's try that again. How are we doing? Amazing, amazing. That's more like it, all right? That's perfect. But before I begin talking about my topic, I just want to have a quick question. How many of you here have heard me before? Go. You can go woohoo, that works. Yeah, just that one cousin right there. She's Indian, in case you're wondering. For the rest of you, let me jog your memory a little bit. Hello, sir. Would you like to buy the new Microsoft support package? Yeah, that's actually my cousin Rajesh, okay? Yeah, life has been really tough for him after the Big Bang Theory. He also recently got kicked out of Microsoft. Yeah, it's really tough. But for some fucking reason, I get mistaken for him quite frequently. You know, whenever people look at me, they think IT support, even though I'm actually an aerospace engineer. And you know, this is something that blows my mind because just last week I was talking to my manager and you know, I was telling him that, sir, I think AI is going to result in a lot of job losses. And he was like, Akash, what do you mean? We have been losing jobs to AI for the last 20 years. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, actual Indians. And I mean, honestly, I can't really blame any one of them for that because people who look like me, they run Google, Microsoft, and a bunch of tech companies. And then the other half, they make all the YouTube tutorials that people watch to then run Google, Microsoft, and all the tech companies. But guys, here is the thing, okay? Like we Indians, we made another very important tutorial. Anyone wants to take a guess?
Kama Sutra.
One guy knows. I did not pay him to say that. Yeah, but it is true, guys. We made the Kama Sutra. And anytime somebody looks at me, they assume I have good software skills. What about my hardware skills, people? I mean, there are 1.4 billion Indians. How do you think that happened? IT support? You know, jokes apart. You know, it is quite tempting to label someone who looks at me and thinks IT support as racist, or you know, maybe even call them a lazy person who likes to stereotype his way through life. You know, and some of you might even say that, Akash, don't give them excuses in today's hyper-connected and global world. This guy should know better. You are not IT support. Well, maybe. But time and again, it has been shown that despite all the talk about a global, connected world, there still exists this gap between people. You know, those awkward pauses, those misunderstandings, those assumptions. And that exactly what cultural gap is. And that is why I'm here today, to help you understand how we can bridge that cultural gap using humor. Why me? Well, because I have had the pain and the pleasure of experiencing it firsthand. I grew up across 5 different states in India. That's like 5 European countries, in case you were wondering, you know. Yeah, it's a big country. Then I lived in Nigeria, studied and worked in the Netherlands, and now I'm here in Germany. And I have had the multitude of options to experience this cultural gap. I mean, for example, when I was actually studying in the Netherlands, believe it or not, I was the first Indian guy a lot of my Dutch classmates were ever friends with. Before me, their exposure to Indian culture was, well, Raj from Big Bang Theory and all my scam calling cousins on YouTube. My exposure to Dutch culture, well, weed. So to think that our first interactions were a bit awkward is kind of an understatement, okay? Because I never really understood why I was getting a bill, or as they like to call it, a tikkie, for taking a bite out of their cheese sandwich. And they never understood why I was using water instead of toilet paper to clean it all up afterwards. Yeah. And it is kind of weird, you know, it is kind of weird. And at that point, with all these differences, we could have walked away. You know, we could have been offended and just walked away. Instead, we used humor. I invited my Dutch classmates over to my place for some Indian dinner, or as you might call it, chicken tikka masala. And then afterwards, I did not send them a bill, or as they like to call it, a tikkie. The good news? The very next day, they realized why firefighters use water and not toilet paper. You know, we used humor to bridge our cultural gaps. You know, instead of cutting out, we connected. You know, we started asking each other even more questions because of humor. That is what humor enabled us to do. You know, we started asking weird cultural questions. We started asking, verifying information on the internet with a real person, and then laughing about all the weird notions that we had about each other. And those weird notions resulted in a lot of laughters. And these laughters eventually resulted in friendships. Friendships that have lasted till this very day. And it were moments like these that helped me realize the power of humor, and which eventually pushed me to do more stand up comedy and share my stories with everyone. Now, when I was moving from the Netherlands to Germany, my Dutch friends did warn me. They were like, Akash, the Germans don't laugh the same way as the Dutch, you know. When you share a joke, they will not laugh. They will look straight into your eyes and approve of the jokes. And it is true, okay? Not a lot of my German audience always laugh at my jokes. Sometimes they come to me after the show and then they tell me, Akash, that joke you said, it was sehr gut. I really enjoyed myself. I was laughing internally. And laughter is different, okay? I do agree, it is a bit different. But you know what did not change across borders? The quirkiness, the desire to connect, and the desire to learn. For example, that one moment at a work party, my 62-year-old Swabian manager, for the ones who don't know, Stuttgart basically, comes to me and asks, Akash, what do you get as a starter if a Swabian man invites you over for dinner? I was like, what do I get? He's like, nothing. Because he's Swabian. Or that moment when I was dealing with a bunch of production worker in Bayern, Munich area, for the ones who don't know. You know, and I was apologizing profusely for not speaking enough German, and this production worker just stops me and he's like, Akash, hold on. You don't need to apologize for not speaking any German, because we also don't speak any German here. We speak Bayerisch. Now, it might seem small, but at that very moment, you know, these were not just small jokes. These were people letting me into their cultures. It was the two of us building that bridge through humor. And you know, these things, even though as small as it might sound, resulted in something bigger. Because then at our workplace, slowly but steadily, we started learning more about each other. We started creating that safe space through laughter where people were not afraid to ask weird-ass questions. You know, we were building that bridge with each other, not through some forced HR workshop or diversity training, but by actually laughing with each other. Now, I know there are several books that explain how you can work in a different multicultural international team, blah, blah, blah. You know, there's a book which explains why Americans, you know, create meetings for everything, why Germans like direct feedback, why Japanese avoid saying no, why Indians mean yes even when they say no. Yeah, the head nod still confuses me. It's all right. Hey, you know, you can't be a master. But that's the thing. There are several books. And these books explain what the differences are. But they don't explain how to get through these differences. They provide us with a map, but not with a tool. And that's where humor really steps in. Because humor is that tool which you can use to bridge the gap between different cultures. And I know what you guys are now thinking. Akash, come on. Isn't it rude to laugh about cultural differences? Isn't it much better that we politely agree to what someone is saying, nod, and then just go our separate ways? Let's just call it agree to disagree. Well, the answer, if you ask me personally, is a big no. Because neurologists have shown that when people laugh together, our brain releases endorphins, which creates connections, even among strangers. So sharing a laugh is maybe just as good as sharing a beer. Don't tell my people in Munich I said that, because they will not like this idea. that's the whole point, that is really the whole point. Because if you look around, let's just look a little bit past into the German history. In 1930s, Germany had a very rich cabaret culture, where people went on stage, they made fun of politics, they made fun of culture, they made fun of a lot of things. But eventually, that got replaced by censorship. That got replaced by propaganda. And look where we are. I mean, you don't even need to look that far back in history, Look what is happening around us today. Jokes are getting censored. Open mics are getting shut down. Late night comedians, well, you know what I'm talking about. Now, before you try to exaggerate it into something, I'm not saying that a good fart joke would have prevented World War II. We need much better things than that. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe if all our world leaders and even the dictators did more open mics, went to more comedy shows, maybe the world would be a better place, maybe even a safer space. And that is what I tried to do, When I moved from Netherlands to Germany, I actually moved to the beautiful city of Darmstadt. I actually started my own open mic show here with a bunch of friends. And now that I live in Munich, I run 3 weekly English comedy shows. And what do we do there? We give everyone the opportunity to come on stage and share their stories. Because sometimes all somebody needs is a microphone and a room full of people just willing to listen to the stories. What do? Well, the one thing that we always make sure of doing is no censorship. People are allowed to say whatever the fuck they want to say. Because the audience gets to decide whether it's funny, appropriate, or not. That is democracy in real time. It is messy, it is dirty, but that is what equality really means. And that is what we want to provide. And now, since in Germany everybody just loves rules so much, we created one rule for the show. We call it equal opportunity offending. Which means no matter how Indian, German, gay, Arab, or vegan you are, everybody is fair game. And you know what happens when everybody gets roasted a little bit? Everybody feels connected. And that is what the power of humor is. Now I see some of you here are, a bit skeptical. You're like, Akash, I know you're a comedian, but we are not comedians. What do we do? Well, I was neither a comedian, When I started, I was terrible at being funny. But the one thing which I did was I took risks. But before I took risks, I learned to laugh at myself. And that is what you guys can start doing, You start small. You start by laughing at yourselves first. Because when you laugh at yourself, you help other people around you relax. You bring down your defenses. And then you start looking for funny in the small things. A small mispronunciation? Well, acknowledge it. Because that helps you tell the other person that you are human. We are human. And it's okay to make mistakes. And above all, guys, humor is messy business. You need to take some risks. Building bridges are hard, and you need to do it that way. Have I cracked some jokes at work that are so funny that my HR and the manager wanted to hear it personally? Probably yes. Can I share those jokes with you here? Absolutely not. Because I'm still under an NDA. Do I have a full-time job? 100%. So if humor can help bridge the gap between HR and an employee, what's a tiny cultural gap, guys? And if there is one message that I can leave with all of you guys, is that let's just stop taking ourselves so seriously. Let's start cracking jokes. And maybe then, this big cultural gap wouldn't really seem that much of a gap, but actually common ground on which we can all work together. Thank you so much.